Mr. Andrew Hoffman, Ann Cunningham, Amir Sobraj.
Sorry, Rachel, could we just make a quick announcement about interpretation since I believe it's arrived?
Yes, so Ms. Benedicta Torres switched places with the gentleman, so she's at number 10 now.
Oh, I just want to talk about interpretation.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I want to make sure that everybody is aware that we do have English to Spanish interpretation available, so when you come up, you can speak in the language you feel comfortable. Quiero dejarles saber a todo el mundo que está aquí, que habla solamente español, que puede venir y dar su testimonio solamente en español si se sienten cómodos en ese lenguaje, porque tenemos un intérprete que habla inglés a español y le puede traducir por usted. Gracias.
We're on speaker 4. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Hoffman. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Community Housing Improvement Program, CHIP, and I'm also a board member of the RSA, Rent Stabilization Association. This year must be different. New York City housing is a tough business, and the Rent Guidelines Board must transcend politics and set a guideline that reflects the increased costs of operating rental housing in New York. You guys heard before obviously you know what your mandate is. Rent Stabilization Law Section 26-510 says you must review the economic condition of the residential real estate industry in New York City, including the prevailing and projected real estate taxes, gross operating income costs, insurance, fees, cost of fuel, labor, cost of financing, and the overall supply of housing accommodations and overall vacancy rates. It's pretty simple. That's what the rent stabilization law says. According to your own PIOC, the price index of operating expenses, our increases last year, real estate taxes went up 5%. Utilities went up 8.4%, including water and sewer. Heating fuel went up 7.8%. Labor, our union labor went up 3%. And please note, we just signed a new 4-year contract with 32BJ, which will have higher increase in labor costs over the next 4 years. I'm actually very proud to say I'm on the negotiating committee. I chaired the negotiating committee. It was a very fair contract that our workers received. 50,000 workers in this city are under this contract. We had a fair agreement, and we provided non-contributory health benefits, making us unique in New York City. Overall, the PIOC was 5.7, and let's understand, this is your number, not our number. We've always contended that the PIOC is outdated and it doesn't capture all of the costs associated with running our buildings. We all know the mayor made a campaign promise, an irresponsible campaign promise, saying this year he would get a 0 at the RGB. He should have never made that promise because the mayor does not control this process. The board is supposed to be fair and impartial, and more importantly, you have a legal mandate under the rent stabilization law to preserve the housing stock. In closing, the last time owners got a rent freeze, 1942, World War II, everyone in the country had price freezes under the overall economic price freezes. You know what? Go back, figure out a way to come back with a 0 PIOC, and I'll have a conversation with you about a 0 rent increase. Until that happens, we need fair and reasonable increases to keep up with our higher expenses. 6% for a 1-year, 9.5 for a 2-year. Thank you very much.
If we can't hear anyone. Okay, thank you, sir.
No, I'm sorry. I was deferring to down the table if there was any questions or comments. Thank you very much for that, and I wonder the same things myself. But I have a question, and it's actually clarification from your other CHIP member. I wanted to make sure that I was correct in my understanding that CHIP is talking much about the fact that MCI, in this NOI number, MCI increases to rent are included in the net operating income number that's being presented by the tenant groups as well as by the Rent Guidelines Board data. but the capital improvements themselves are not in that number, the cost.
Correct. The income gets picked up as part of the income, but the cost, because it's capitalized, is not. If it was a simple repair, it would be picked up in the basket.
Right.
But because it's a capital expense, it does not get picked up in the PIOC.
And to take that even further, it specifically cannot be a repair in order for it to be deemed an MCI. So inherently, it must be below the capital expenditure itself must be below the net operating income.
Correct. You know what happened here is in 1984, the Omnibus Housing Act, because of apartment buildings were stabilized and there was a disinvestment to improve their property, owners were given for the first time the ability to pass along those capitalized costs as part of an MCI increase. And it's an incentive to operate your property well and to make improvements. Unfortunately, only the income gets picked up for your exercise, not the expense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ann Cunningham.
I'm sorry, with all the respect, I have to go to work. I will have 5 minutes to
Ma'am, I'm
work.
so sorry. We can't start going out of order now. We really can't. I'm so sorry. Because there's a room full of people, many of whom have to go to work.
All I
I'm
have
very,
to say
very
is
sorry.
let's exercise democracy and give us a right to live in the city, please. I'm sorry.
Ms. Cunningham?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, staff, members of the Rent Guideline Board, and all those present today. My name is Ann Cunningham. Since 1979, I have been assisting tenants in every possible capacity, in particular hotel and SRO tenants who are rapidly disappearing from communities throughout the city. For the past 13 and a half years, I have served with former council member Gail Brewer, now Manhattan Borough President Gail A. Brewer, as a housing specialist and still continue. And I'm also liaison to senior citizens. In the last 4 years, while working part-time from Hamilton Project Senior Center, I have acquired hundreds of cases, including touching base with the local homeless population. And as one person said before, quite a few homeless are former SRO tenants. Today, I am testifying on behalf of the tenants residing at the Tempo Hotel, formerly the Commander Hotel. Aimco is the landlord. Needless to say, conditions have not improved since last year's testimony. Violations exist, never-ending construction, broken elevators, apartment repairs are needed, and while harassment still continues, the landlord has applied to Housing Preservation and Development for a certificate of non-harassment. This causes anxiety to the tenants, now in fear of losing their units. Larry Wood of Goddard Riverside, when testifying at the public meeting on May 1st of this year, adequately described in depth the problems currently faced by SRO and hotel tenants. Rent-stabilized tenants occupy 68 units of the Tempo Hotel, while 132 fair market units are grossly overpriced from $1,900 to $2,300 for these small rooms. And that is a month. And most of these have been illegally converted to studios. And the other apartments, the one-bedrooms, are around $35,000 to $4,000 a month. A rent increase would support further conversions and an unjust unit upgrade for fair market rents. Kindly refer to the newspaper article in Exhibit A on page 2, reporting of landlords paying 6 figures for an ad campaign, encouraging the RGB to vote for rent increases. Obviously, this money would be better spent in maintaining their buildings. The board should also consider the millions of dollars these landlords still owe to the city on their unpaid housing violations. In closing, I thank you for your understanding that tenants have to struggle to make ends meet and pay rent, while others simply cannot pay at all and are evicted. Your consideration in voting for a zero increase for SRO and hotel tenants is greatly appreciated and will insist in keeping these tenants in their homes. Thank you once again for your work and for the pleasure of participation.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Amir Sobraj, Bianca McPherson, Jimmy Silber, please.
Hello, everyone. I just want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak today. First, I'd like to begin by saying I work for an owner-operated small family business. We are not the typical very large landlord, but we are very hands-on operators and take a lot of pride in the properties we own. We take a lot of pride in the property. We take a lot of pride in the properties that we own and operate. I'd like to begin by saying that we believe that the one-year increase should be approximately at 6% and the two-year at the very least 9.5%. The underlying rationale for these increases is that the owner's expenses continue to go up. Just between water, real estate taxes, and the various fees levied by the city agencies, we pay approximately 40+% back to New York City itself. I can't fathom a rent freeze, as a property tax freeze seems just as unfathomable. Energy costs to run these properties have been particularly exorbitant. Even with double-paned windows and take advantages of the various energy efficiency programs offered by NYSERDA, we are still at the market's mercies for costs of natural gas and oil. Both two items I think everyone here can acknowledge is very expensive. The polar vortex this past winter has decimated our reserves. Buildings that would have made some profit for a few years are now back to zero. Perhaps the most troubling part, and I think this has been echoed by many other landlords, is that the net operating factor is the primary deciding factor on how these increases are levied. Net NOI is not the same thing as cash flow, and I think everyone needs to understand that free cash flow is such an important component of how we operate our buildings. The capital expenditures, considering from boilers, new roofs, pointing work, these are the things that make buildings worthwhile to live in. We need to rehab these structures. The bottom line is most of the housing stock, especially in our area in Jamaica, Queens, is being post-World War II. These buildings are 60, 70, some of them earlier than World War II, up to 80 years old. They're coated with lead paint, asbestos. These are very expensive and difficult things to remediate. Furthermore, Local Law 87 and 84 add tremendous costs. If the fare increases are not levied, these older edifices will follow the route of dilapidation and ultimately reduce the housing stock available. The simple truth is that operating costs have gone up. It's explicit in your 2014 price index of operating cost. We are simply asking for some reprieve. We believe in providing quality and affordable housing stock, but increases are necessary to provide and maintain the housing stock. If the board institutes a rent freeze, then they would need to ensure that operating costs are also frozen. Thank you.
Excuse me? Excuse me? Hi. I'm on this side. Hi. How many units do you own total?
We have about 2,000 units.
Okay. And how many of those units are market rate in the buildings? I mean, as far as like the compositions of your buildings?
I would say less than 5%.
Less than 5% of all the units you own are not rent stabilized?
No, yes, correct. Most of our units are stabilized. They fall under the guise of, with the J51 abatements, and all the rents are below $2,500 legal.
Have you applied for any MCIs in the last 5 years?
We do a lot of MCI work, so we really are add value operators. But at the same token, in order to keep these buildings livable, we need to do this work. It's very important. We really believe in the housing stock in that part of town.
You said you own 2,000 units?
Correct.
And have you always owned 2,000 units?
No, it takes some time, but a gentleman had also mentioned that we do a lot of refinancing. The properties don't generate this type of income. We believe in purchasing properties that are dilapidated at the almost bottom of the market and, putting the time in and keeping the communities going with these improvements.
So you've grown your portfolio over time through this process?
Slowly.
Thank you.
Just one where do you own the majority of your properties?
Hollis, Queens, and Jamaica, Queens.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bianca McPherson, then Jimmy Silber, then Cheryl Miller.
Hi, my name is Bianca McPherson. I will be presenting testimony on behalf of Assemblymember Gottfried. My name is Richard N. Gottfried. I represent the 75th Assembly District in Manhattan, which includes the neighborhoods of Chelsea, Hell's Kitchen, Clinton, Midwood, part of the Upper West Side, and Murray Hill. I regret that due to the legislative session in Albany, I am unable to testify today in person. These proposed increases are much more reasonable than those imposed in previous years. However, if rent increases are approved, they would make life harder for rent-paying New Yorkers. I oppose proposals for this year's higher than 0% and urge that the board reject them. As New York City struggles to create more affordable housing, the Rent Guidelines Board should be working to protect and preserve existing affordable housing, not helping more and more housing become unaffordable. In past years, the Rent Guidelines Board justified high, permanent increases in rents by citing unusual temporary price surges, reflecting in the price index of operating costs. The truth is that current rents are already above landlord costs. Last year, the board approved a 4% increase for one-year leases and 7.75% increases for two-year leases. No increase was justified last year, and tenants continue to struggle as a result. Because previous increases were much larger than were warranted, and the economy in New York City is still recovering from the nationwide recession, the board should be enacting a rent freeze this year. It is long past time to abandon the price index. The price index looks at increases in prices of items such as fuel, insurance premiums, utilities, and property taxes. But a price increase is only a spending increase if the landlord continues to buy the items at the same pace rather than cutting back on services. Studies have shown that many landlords will cut back on services to save money. More importantly, the price index does not take into account the income of tenants, and its data on landlord income and expenses is outdated by the time the board makes its decision. Because it is so one-sided, the price index is incapable of guiding our decision-making fairly. Giving tenants the option to move out of their unaffordable apartments is not a solution. The city has lost over 65,000 rent-stabilized units since just 2003. While affordable housing options are becoming scarcer, unemployment and poverty measures in New York City have increased dramatically, and in recent years and remain high. All the while, New York continues to have the highest cost of living in the country, with more than 1 million of the city's tenants paying 30% or greater in their household income, and nearly 600,000 of these tenants paying over one-half of their income towards rent. From 2005 to 2012, the median rent in New York City rose 11%. Meanwhile, household incomes rose at a low 2%. The board has a duty to consider the unfairness of this equation and reflect on whether landlords or tenants can better afford to pay the costs. I urge the board to vote against the rent increases and adopt a rent freeze this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Jimmy Silber, then Cheryl Miller and Hal Brill.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Silber from Sponey, and I want to share with the board some astounding information that we have found out about an owner. It's not often that I talk about other owners, but this is an owner of a building in Brooklyn. And for those of you in the audience who can't see the handout that I just passed out, it's a listing of an apartment on Craigslist last fall on the internet. And it listed as a one-bedroom, one-bath apartment. The address is 384 11th Street, Brooklyn, New York, in Park Slope. And the owner of this apartment is listing it for $2,200 a month in Park Slope. And you might say that this owner is getting top dollar for this apartment because the average rent-stabilized rent in Brooklyn, as reported by the Rent Guidelines Board staff, is $963 a month. So you'd say this owner is making a windfall profit, wouldn't you? He's charging 200% more than the average rent-stabilized apartment in his neighborhood. And I wonder who this owner is. Do we know? Well, we looked up the deed for this building, and it was signed in 2004, and the name on the deed is Mayor Bill de Blasio. Isn't that something? Our champion of affordable housing in this city himself rents his own apartment for market rate top dollar. I think that is hypocrisy at its ultimate, and it is a sham how this mayor can expect small property owners of this city to absorb a rent freeze and continue to subsidize the rent-stabilized tenants in their apartments when he refuses to even do that himself is a sham. And I think it makes his proposal for you board members of a rent freeze sheer hypocrisy and lunacy. And this is what we deal with in this city, political hypocrisy. And in addition to that, I'd like to present some other facts about Mr. de Blasio's building. He reports that the building lost $10,800 more than the income, okay? And when you look at the income presented, it was $42,000. When you look at the deductions, it's $68,000. But when you carve out depreciation and debt service, you know what? You come out with an NOI to income ratio of 50%. Isn't that amazing? Our mayor runs a building with NOI of 50%, while the rest of us, according to Rent Guidelines Board staff reports, operated 35%. This is the mayor who's saying there should be a rent freeze because NOI of owners is rising. Come on. Please, when you vote for this rent increase, hopefully a rent increase next Monday, remember the story that I told you today and ask yourselves, do you want to be part of this? Do you want to fulfill the expectancies of the mayor who he himself cannot adhere to his own public policy? Shameful.
Mr. Silver, thank you very much for your very powerful testimony and for doing the research that reveals, as you say, the deep hypocrisy. I'd like to ask you a question about subletting. In our discussions during the preliminary vote, there was reference to an annual increase of 10% subletting fee. Could you explain why that's a necessary increase that we should not forego, as there are some persons on the board that feel that that is an excessive charge?
The Rent Guidelines Board sublet allowance has been passed year after year for 30 years, and the basis of it is it's structured after what's in the New York State statute now that allows a rent-stabilized tenant to sublet for any 2 years out of any 4-year period. And when the tenant sublets, the tenant is allowed to collect a 10% sublet surcharge from the proposed subtenant. All this 10% does for owners is giving them the same equality. It lets the owner collect 10% for having to hire an attorney to review all the data that the subtenant is proposing. It gives the owner money to pay for credit checks, to go over all of the credits that he's now going to have to review. So it's not a charge even that goes directly to the tenant. It's a surcharge that's passed by the tenant onto the subtenant, and it's only collected during the period of the sublet. That was the rational purpose of it. It mirrors what's already allowed in the law for tenants. It's reasonable and fair.
Clarifying that.
I just want to be clear what we're saying, because I think we agree that then all these units in small buildings, less than 6 units, you're suggesting, since it's now listed at 2,200, they should be subject to rent regulation and be subject to oversight because you don't want to see these high rents in Brooklyn. Is that, I hear we're saying the same thing then, right?
I don't know. I think we were in two different rooms when I was speaking.
I think we always are in two different rooms,
I
actually.
never said anything.
Well, you're saying
to
that the mayor
effect of
shouldn't
what
be able to
you're
rent
saying.
something for $2,200 when it's a market rate
No,
unit.
I'm saying that the champion of affordable housing in this city, when he rents a building where he owns the apartments and he's charging $2,200 a month for that unit, which is the top dollar in that neighborhood, and his NOI is 50%.
It isn't the top dollar in that neighborhood, just so you know.
His NOI is 50%. I think there's something wrong here. There's
we
something
agree
wrong
there's
with
something wrong
policy
here.
in this city.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much.
Mr. Silver, I think the one thing you and I think, hopefully can agree upon is that the decision the board makes should be made upon a fair evaluation of the data and a careful assessment of the mandate of the law. Can we both agree on that?
I agree with you completely. And the data, the price index data shows a 5.7% increase. If you take out of the price index component only taxes, forget insurance, forget labor, forget fuel, forget repairs and maintenance on a building, just taxes, what an owner has to pay to the city in taxes, you come out with 2.8%. Just to make the owner whole this year, what the owner has to give back to the city to fund social programs that the tenants benefit from. To keep the city running, the owner has to pay 2.5% in taxes. That's the bare minimum that you should grant to be whole. That only covers taxes, nothing else. How can you say the data indicates anything less than that?
Thank you, Mr. Sponey. I've equated you and your organization. Thank you, Mr. Silver.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Silver. I just want to ask you about your profit margin for a second. What is your profit margin for your buildings?
I don't know my profit margin.
You don't. So you are telling me that you are in a business right now where you make absolutely no profit.
Listen, just tell me something. You know, when my grandfather built this building, this was a capitalist country where people started businesses in order to make money, right? It's profit motive.
I think we still are.
Isn't that why
Yeah.
people are going business?
Right.
Don't grocery stores open to try to make money? So what difference? You don't ask that to the bodega on your street corner. How much profit do you make?
Well, I think we're in a different situation, right? Because the bodega is not claiming that they're poor. They're not claiming that they're making no money. They're not also asking us not to consider the other side during rent stabilization, correct? We're no longer in that, we're not in that, right? Because you chose, after a while when it was rent stabilized, that's what the law says, that we're supposed to take both sides. And for year after year after year, you have gotten increases that exceed sometimes what the NOA says, right? And so NOI says. So I think that we're in a different position. We're also in a different place. And I think that is true with racial, and I want to echo that we're here to make sure that we are looking at both sides, but also that we're looking at the data, not at news articles that seem, or printouts that don't have websites on them or any other information for us to actually have a clear understanding.
No,
but thank you so much for your testimony. I really appreciate it.
I'd like to answer you. First of all, you're looking at data of what it takes to run a building. Okay, that's your mandate, to look at the costs of running a building. And you do that by creating a price index to examine costs for the owner year after year. And the average increase has been 2 to 3%. So you've leaned over backwards to protect tenants in the last 20 years. And you've been reimbursing owners somewhat for their costs. That's what your mandate is, not to decide on a building by building basis what an owner is making as a profit and deciding, no, that's too much and we have to have a redistribution of wealth here and he shouldn't be allowed to make any more money. That's what you're talking about.
Thank you so much, Mr. Silver. If we could hear from Cheryl Miller, and then Hal Brill and Larry Wood, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Miller. I live at West 165th Street up in Washington Heights. I've been living in my apartment now for the past 8 years. And in the 8 years that I've been living there, I have seen a steady decline in maintenance. I was living in one apartment for 6 years. 2 years ago, I moved into a different apartment in the same building, but on another side of the building is split. For the past 2 years now, every month I'm getting leaks in my kitchen ceiling. I have been back and forth to housing court for the time that I've been dealing with this. And I've been hearing nothing but excuses from the landlord that it's tenant behavior, that somebody upstairs from me is throwing water on the floor. This is madness, okay? This is a bunch of baloney. They have more money than they know what to do with. My building is owned by Volunteers of America. They have buildings all over the 5 boroughs. They got more money than they know what to do with. And they have one maintenance person. They have 6 maintenance people. 3 of them mop the floors and throw out the garbage. There's one person that maybe does handiwork. And that one person, because they don't want to spend the money to hire another handyman, so they have this man running back and forth to different sites. So if there's an emergency in my building, nobody can handle it because he's at another site. And yet they have the audacity to raise my rent every year. I'm 60 years old. I don't qualify for SCREE. I don't qualify for DRE. My building is predominantly Section 8, and I don't qualify for Section 8. I don't get any rent subsidy. I'm on a fixed income. I do not work. I'm on a work-related disability, and I live on my checks that I get from week to week. That is how I live. I cannot afford to be paying any more rent than what I'm paying. As far as I'm concerned, they should freeze the rent. They should freeze the rent because they are not doing what they're supposed to do in my building. I pay for maintenance costs. I don't pay rent to just occupy 4 walls and a ceiling. When you occupy an apartment and the rent that you pay includes maintenance, and they are not doing what they're supposed to do. I'm tired. This is greatly affecting my quality of life. I'm constantly looking up in my ceiling because I don't know from one day to the next when I'm going to get another leak. And this is ridiculous, and I'm dealing with this for 2 years. I just went back to court last week. 2 days later, I got another leak. And these people are getting violations. They're trying to do everything that they can to get out of paying violations and civil penalties, which they should be imposed on this landlord. And I'm asking that you vote to freeze the rents on rent-stabilized apartments. There are people in here that cannot afford to be paying any more rent, and I would be one of them. I'm living at the poverty level. And these landlords don't deserve to get any kind of an increase. They got more money than they know what to do with. They all stand up here and give their sob stories, and I'm not buying into any of it.
Thank you for your testimony. Hal Brill.
Good afternoon. I'm Hal Brill, a small property owner and manager of a building in Manhattan. The inadequate guideline increases have created long-term rentals with rents too low to cover costs. Owners' costs have risen 5 to 7% according to the price index of operating costs. Real estate taxes, water rates have increased. I have not heard of any calls for any rollbacks in taxes or water rates, nor any freezes, nor have my suppliers announced any lower products, services, or fees. No, quite the contrary. Prices have all risen 5 to 10%. Regulation of the real estate business has increased, and so have the cost of complying with these regulations. Long-term tenants have the lowest rents of all well below subsistence levels. Multi-generational apartments are all too common now, all with the lowest rents. This progressive agenda of no rent increases and rent freezes is very, very wrong. These low rents should have significant supplemental guideline increases in addition to whatever highest guideline increases possible. The system is skewed against all landlords. The Rent Guidelines Board has failed. The small landlord, all landlords, it allows only minuscule increases that have not kept up with inflation and, in fact, fall further and further behind every year. Clearly, the situation cannot be rectified overnight, but incremental steps need to be taken immediately. Raise the guideline increases, reinstitute vacancy allowances or decontrol, and apartment rents can rise. We need apartment rents rising to subsistence levels and minimum increases for the lowest rents. This 20% vacancy allowance that the state provides is not enough to make up for the catastrophic situation the Rent Guidelines Board has created throughout the years and still perpetuates. We need vacancy decontrol. These are the facts year after year, meeting after meeting, but we need higher guideline increases now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're so close, Ms. Torres. Two more. Two more.
Yay, Mr. Wood.
Hi. Thank you for this audience, and I wanted to thank you again, as I did in a private meeting when we had the expert testimony.
Our private public meeting, just to clarify.
Private public meeting, yes, for the invited panels when we were invited to testify before the Rent Guidelines Board. Thank you for the correction. But I know you have looked at the data we provided you regarding SROs and the hotels, and I really want to thank you for the preliminary guideline vote of 0. And I wanted to thank each and every one of you individually as well. I know both Harvey and Sheila have been working not just here at the Rent Guidelines Board, have had countless meetings and spent a lot of time meeting with the tenant community outside the Rent Guidelines Board process to prepare folks, to encourage them to testify, to come out. I do want to thank even Magna and Sarah, the landlord reps. I know I don't always agree with your analysis, I don't agree with your prescriptions, but I certainly have to give you credit for your persistence and your hard work toward this process. And Sarah, I don't know if you're aware, but the vote you took at the preliminary hearing, it was the first time that I ever seen a landlord rep join with the tenant reps and vote for the same guideline. And I thought that was a good sign. I understand you took a lot of heat for that vote because it was the range of 0 to 3, but I took it as a good sign that you were willing to listen, to compromise, and to negotiate with the others. And often there's no negotiation. People stake out positions, but I thought it was a good sign that you were willing to vote for a guideline and to get into deliberations with the other members. And for the public members, David, I know you don't speak a lot publicly. I remember last year you told me that I was effective advocate on behalf of the SRO tenants, and that meant a lot to us. You do this work because we don't know if we listen to or if you really hear what we present before you. So, you and Carol both last year did support the 0 guideline. I think you really looked at the data and you did the right thing. And our new public members, Rachel, Stephen, Cecilia, you're also in a tough position, I know. You're new members, you've been looking at all the data, looking at all the material brought before you, and it's hard enough making a decision based on all the reports and the incomplete data. You don't have open books, so it's really difficult to figure out what's warranted and what's fair. Clearly, some owners need an increase, but I think the majority of owners are doing quite well. Tenants, there are some tenants that could pay a rent increase, but the data shows that the vast majority are paying huge rent burdens. So you have a difficult job, and I just think it's abhorrent that there's political pressure being put on you from the mayor's office or from the real estate industry or from banks or wherever it's coming from. You don't need that extra political pressure on top of a very difficult decision you have to make anyway. But I believe all the data and research that's been presented before you really underscores the need for the tenants to have a break this year, just to catch up a little bit. There's no way we're going to have a rent freeze forever. I understand that. There's a lot of things you have to balance. But I think this is the year that we need some balance and give the tenants a break from those really extremely high rent burdens. You're stuck with the one-size-fits-all rent increase. You have to do what's best for the most folks, and that really is a rent freeze this year. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you for your testimony.
Larry, I understand you passed out a handout. I would like for you to elaborate as to why we should look at it. What is it about?
I had given you material already showing the really high, mean, and medium rents in SROs. This was the memos that the DHCR staff had prepared. So since I had met at that invited panel, you had gotten a list of questions answered from DHCR. So I just wanted to point out the questions that addressed the hotels, as that was 17, 18, 19, and 20. As in past years, the data where they showed 17, almost 18,000 units were registered with DHCR. It seems like the last number of years as late registrations come in. So you see question 18, you have in 2009, 10, 11, and 12, somewhere between 21 and 22,000 units of SRO units registered. We think there's an under-registration. There's still more units out there. But again, it only shows 17,000 registered, but that number will probably come up to around the 22,000 eventually. But very similar, over 11% of the units are warehoused or vacant. Over 20% of the units are registered as exempt, which means they're getting market rents, and we think that's underreported. But I'm just astounded by the mean and medium rents. For an SRO room, $2,288 is the mean rent, and the medium is $1,220. We're talking about SRO units. These are much higher than the apartment rents. There's nothing out there that could justify giving SRO tenants an increase. So you have all the data. You've already voted zero. I hope you vote zero again on the final vote.
Thank you, Mr. Wood.
Thank you.
Lee Williams, Benedicta Torres Lopez. After Mr. Williams, ma'am, one more speaker, and then Millie Otero, but you'll be right after him.
Good afternoon. My name's Lee Williams, and I'm probably one of the most hated people in the room. I'm a real estate agent in the city of New York. Yeah, see? I told you. I'm a real estate agent who works with a lot of small landlords, and they deserve an increase. I'm not going to get into particulars of what the increase is going to be. They need more. The tenants obviously want their dollar to go further. And I've prepared some comments, but I think that most of this has been covered by previous speakers. The reason that I'm testifying today is that I have a unique ability to see both sides of the issue. I used to live in rent-regulated housing. I had a rent-stabilized apartment in West Harlem. I now own. It's a very contentious issue on both sides, but what I keep hearing is that fuel is going up from the landlords I work with. Real estate taxes are going up from the landlords that I work with. The price of their repairs are going up. When was the last time you guys called a plumber and they gave you a break on a price? It hasn't happened for me. I don't know about you. If you do, I'd like their name and number. The point that I want to make is that we're taking into account that the landlords want to maintain their buildings. This is what I hear from all the landlords that I work with. They understand the value of a well-maintained, clean, decent apartment. It's worth more to them, and the tenants are happier, everybody's happier. But in order to do that, they need the increase in order to do that. An example that I use with my clients a lot of times that they can understand and appreciate is that subway fares have gone up. They were $2 as early as 2009. Now they're 25% higher. And I use the subway because we all depend on it. It's something that we can't change, and we all know how on time they are lately. So, it's the same with a building or an apartment that is rent regulated. The size of it isn't going to change. We can't move it, and people are going to depend on it for their living situation. I would also ask you guys to take a look at some of the other myriad of agencies that some of the small landlords here have to deal with. Our dear mayor has been mentioned before. My comments about him aren't as in-depth, but he needed a letter from the Department of Buildings so that he could register his apartment, and was not able to get one, and is now subject to $500 fines. Our public advocate is also in the same situation, has had violations going back several years. I'm sure each one of them wants to present and preserve their housing stock. So, it's not just the large landlords, it's the small landlords. They all need this increase, whether it be 5% or 9%. They do need it. And the reason that I'm here talking about it is because my clients have indicated that they want to see better housing when I take them out looking for it. and the landlords want to see better tenants, and they want happy tenants. And that's all I have to say. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony.
I have a question. Where do you mainly show your apartments? What areas? Is it West Harlem, Upper West Side, or?
I do sort of the crown of the park and then in the East Village. So from 96th Street north to 116th Street, east to west, and then in the East Village.
Thank you.
Sorry, how many units do you own?
Pardon me?
How many units do you own?
I don't, and that's why I came to testify today, because mine is a truly disinterested, objective opinion.
And do you see tenants telling you that the rents are too high and they can't afford them?
I do.
And so what do you do? What do you ask us to do if we're only giving landlords increases time and time and again for 44 years?
I would ask you to explain to tenants that things cost money.
I think that they understand that when they pay 50% of their income in rent or more, and so many tenants are high burden rent. But thank you so much for your testimony.
I'm glad you bring up that point, and I'd like the opportunity to respond to that.
Sure.
A lot of the landlords that I work with are small landlords. They also work for a living, and they are also paying out of pocket, out of the NOI, which does not account for debt service. So what they're asking me is, what do I do as a small landlord? And the answer that's coming back to a lot of the landlords is take your non-regulated apartments and go co-op or condo. And if you think there's an issue now with rent-regulated apartments and affordable housing, you wait until some of the small landlords turn their apartments into condominiums and co-ops and leave the city with the rent-regulated apartments. But thank you for your question. I do appreciate the opportunity.
I do have a question for you as well. So you represent small property owners, right?
Yes, sir.
And you think they're in a different situation than large property owners who own thousands of units?
Absolutely. They have better access to capital.
Thank you.
And there are economies of scale in running their buildings.
You were very kind to cede your space to the gentleman before. We are very glad to have you here.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm glad to be here too. Ma'am, good afternoon. Ma'am, I'm here today to speak about SRO, the SRO living, and especially the SRO hotels. We, the tenants that live in SRO throughout the city, we have a very, very hard time dealing with the person in charge of the building. In my building, it's a hotel. It's an SRO hotel. We have no rights whatsoever. We're not supposed to complain about anything. The landlord insists on taking us to court every so often to force us to pay the very illegal rent increase, zero rent increase for SRO and SRO hotels. That was the vote for single room occupancy last year. But yet, the human mistake that manages my building where I live said that do not apply to us. I can charge whatever I want. She keeps on taking us constantly to housing court because she knows that in housing court we do not have the right to fight a very high expensive law firm that goes. That gentleman that is standing down there, he is my neighbor. That man is a veteran. His name is Mr. Farman, Nelson Farman. His rent is $503. She takes him to court to pay whatever she wants to. Right now, he's in court. He will be going back to court in 2 months. Lucky him, I went with him. He told me that he has an eviction notice from the marshal. And when I saw the paper, the notice, I told him, we're going to call tomorrow to get an order to show cause. Mr. Farmer was very afraid to do so, but I told him no need to be afraid. And we did, and they tried. What the landlord did, she refused to go into the bank to get the rent, to cash his rent check. Luckily, the SRO law project went with us, and thanks to the SRO law project, Mr. Farmer can breathe a lot easier. We ask you, I'm asking you on behalf, my building is a senior citizens building. I'm the youngest one. I'm the youngest one because I'm the only one that is able to stand here and talk to you. Is senior citizens. Many of them, after that woman finished taking their money from their Social Security or from SSI or Section 8, whatever, the poor tenants have nothing to eat for the rest of the month. I am asking you, please freeze the rent. Please freeze the rent. Freeze the rent.
Thank you for your testimony. Millie Otero, Marietta Hawks, and Robert Luo. Millie Otero. 16 for owners and 9 for tenants, yes. Yes,
number 9
yes.
for tenants.
We're at number 9 for tenants. We go both back and forth. Actually, come on up, you're next. They got confused. It's been a long day. Please.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Millie Otero. I want to thank the board for the opportunity to present my point to you. I represent Columba Cavanagh House. We are an organization in Harlem providing supportive housing since 1990. Our buildings offer permanent housing to homeless individuals that have resided in the city shelters. They come to us with chemical dependencies and with mental illness. As an SRO, we haven't received increases in quite some time. In hearing some of the other individuals speaking about the SROs and the rents that they quote, in our case, our range of rents are anywhere between $600 and $700 a month. This includes all the operating expenses like any other landlord, and in addition to that, 100% of the electricity, 100% of the cooking gas, and the furnishings for each one of the rooms and each one of the apartments. Our tenants enter our buildings paying 30% of their income, and that remains throughout the time that they live with us. When they first come to us, they don't have any subsidies. So 30% of their income covers during the period of time that they are without subsidy. That means for someone in public assistance, $215 a month, someone on SSI, SSD, or Social Security, anywhere between $240 and $260 a month. And we maintain minimum 95% occupancy in our buildings. We have 3 buildings. We need some type of increase. We need some type of fair adjustment in order to be able to continue for another 20-something years of offering the services that have been very much needed during the years that we have served the community. in order for us to continue providing the housing, in order to be able to afford the work that needs to be done on these buildings that had moderate rehab 20, 23 years ago, we can't continue surviving with the low rents that we currently have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
I have a question. Thank you very much for coming today and telling us of this different type of housing that is still also subject to rent stabilization, since the image that seems to be propounded here often is that they are all wealthy landlords of mega buildings. In fact, a zero increase would severely affect your organization.
Definitely.
And can you tell us approximately, if you haven't already, how many units of housing you provide?
We offer 260 units.
260 units. And in your experience, how many other operators in the community that you serve exist?
There are a good number of different SROs in our neighborhood, and I know that also in the Bronx, that follow the guidelines and don't have exorbitant rents and are trying to maintain not only the buildings, but maintain these individuals housed.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your time.
Councilman Callos, can you wait 1 second? We have a tenant who's been waiting quite a while. Thank you so much. Mr. Jones?
The word landlord is not used, the word landlord owner is not used even once by the Corporation Council 100 Church. Assemblyman Keith Wright indicated that their developer diverted $100 million from their building fund for personal use. This is Harlem. He's also the Democratic leader for New York. That's $100 million, 8 zeros. HPD said that they would rather talk about $100 million than $200,000, which in my case at 1870 Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard, 1880s Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard, 30 independent residential units. Negro Stoogie Real Estate Company. During the same time frame, Negro Stoogie in possession of manufacturers' late edition luxury automobiles. Commissioner of Finance, City of New York foreclosure. Page 1. Any false statement in such affidavit shall not be grounds to cancel the agreement. Now, HPD sent a plumbing contractor to fix the plumbing in my apartment because I'm on the lobby floor and the people who flush upstairs, it was coming down into my apartment. However, they sent a white plumbing contractor there. Now, possibly, I know people, there are people who know definitely that there is something called a race hustler. Because my white contractor, while they were wrapping up the plumbing in my apartment, was attacked by this Negro Stoogie real estate company. They played the race card on him right there in Harlem. They attacked him and started calling him, you know, using white words, that he's white and that he doesn't belong there. Because he had actually lost at 111 Center Street. The judge told him no, that I was the lawful tenant. So he had to get the apartment from me in some other way. He played the race card with my plumber. It's paid by HPD. However, they were run off because they was, you know, they say they were white by this Negro Stoogie. And the district attorney is saying that because my plumber was
Mr. Jones, I'm so sorry. I have to stop you now. We have a councilman waiting. Thank you so much for your testimony.